Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories.
President Trump announces the formation of the Gaza Board of Peace. The president also gets a Nobel Peace Prize of sorts. And the U.S. has some tough talk for Iran at an emergency UN meeting.
The FBI is investigating who's funding violent anti-ICE protests, why federal officials say they need to follow the money.
26 people have been indicted for an alleged game-fixing scheme in men's college basketball. We'll take a closer look at the scandal, which had millions of dollars on the line.
The president has unveiled his long-awaited plan to lower health care costs. The key senator says he'll take quick action to push the plan forward.
Special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, speaks at the Israeli-American Council. He discusses Iran, President Trump as commander-in-chief, and a behind-the-scenes look at bringing hostages home from Gaza.
NASA is one step closer to its next crewed mission around the moon as it prepares to roll its rocket and spacecraft tomorrow ahead of a planned February mission.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today's Friday, January 16th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, President Trump announcing just yesterday the formation of the Gaza Board of Peace. The move follows the start of the second phase of a U.S.-backed ceasefire agreement between Israel and terrorist group Hamas.
NTD's Dana Monahan has more on that, plus some tough words from Iran at an emergency UN Council meeting.
President Trump made the announcement on Truth Social, writing, "It is my great honor to announce that the Board of Peace has been formed." Trump wrote that the members of the board would be announced shortly, calling the group the greatest and most prestigious board ever assembled. The board will be chaired by Trump and oversee a Palestinian technocratic committee tasked with governing the Gaza Strip. The United States will work with mediators Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey to secure a demilitarization agreement requiring Hamas to surrender all weapons and dismantle its tunnel network. The terror group must also return the body of the last deceased hostage to Israel. The Gaza Peace Initiative began in October 2025 and is structured in 3 phases, aimed at fulfilling the 20-point peace framework Trump outlined last September. President Trump met Venezuelan opposition leader María Corina Machado at the White House yesterday. Machado gave her Nobel Peace Prize medal to Trump, explaining why on Fox News.
Because he deserves it. And it was a very emotional moment. I decided to present the Nobel Peace Prize medal on behalf of the people of Venezuela.
Trump later wrote on social media that the gesture was wonderful and reflected mutual respect. Machado said she was struck by how clearly Trump understands the crisis in Venezuela and his concern for the suffering of its people. The United States held an emergency United Nations Security Council meeting yesterday, held at Washington's request. UN Ambassador Mike Waltz said the Iranian regime is solely responsible for the economic misery of the Iranian people and the repression of their freedom, and vowed they would be held accountable.
President Donald J. Trump and the United States of America stands by the brave people of Iran. Period.
Waltz dismissed Iranian regime claims that the protests are a foreign plot to give an excuse for military action.
Everyone in the world needs to know that the regime is weaker than ever before and therefore is putting forward this lie because of the power of the Iranian people in the streets. They are afraid. They're afraid of their own people.
Ambassador Waltz also brushed aside Iran's claims that it's ready for dialogue, commenting that the regime's actions say otherwise.
This is a regime that rules through oppression, through violence, and through intimidation.
Iran seeks neither escalation nor confrontation. However, any act of aggression, direct or indirect, will be met with a decisive, proportionate, and lawful response.
President Trump is a man of action, not endless talk like we see at the United Nations. He has made it clear all options are on the table to stop the slaughter.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also had a message for the regime yesterday.
U.S. Treasury knows that like rats in a sinking ship, you're frantically wiring funds stolen from Iranian families to banks and financial institutions around the world. Rest assured, we will track them and you.
Secretary Bessent added that the United States stands firmly behind the Iranian people in their call for freedom and justice. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And some European countries are sending soldiers to Greenland. President Trump is increasing calls to protect the island from adversaries, especially China and Russia. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more.
I don't think troops in Europe impact the president's decision-making process, nor does it impact his goal of the acquisition of Greenland at all.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying the U.S. still plans to acquire Greenland, despite some European nations sending troops to the island.
Mesdames et messieurs, en vos grades et qualités.
French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that France is among the European nations sending troops to Greenland. Germany, France, Sweden, Norway, Finland and the Netherlands are sending military personnel as well. They say the goal is to begin preparations for large-scale military drills later this year.
Une première équipe de militaires français est déjà...
A first team of French soldiers is already on site and will be reinforced in the coming days by land, air and sea means.
President Trump is increasing calls to protect the island from adversaries, especially China and Russia. According to Trump, Denmark, which controls Greenland, is not powerful enough to protect the strategically important island. The president therefore says the U.S. needs to own Greenland and has offered to purchase it. Leavitt says the U.S. had a meeting about such an acquisition on Wednesday and will continue having regular talks.
Those talks will take place, I'm told, every 2 to 3 weeks. So this is a conversation the administration intends to keep having.
She added that those talks will be between representatives from the U.S., Denmark and Greenland. Trump, who says he favors diplomacy, previously declined to rule out acquiring Greenland by force. Poland's prime minister on Thursday was asked how Europe would react to such a move by the U.S.
Does Europe have a plan? Ladies and gentlemen, for such situations, there are no plans. I will do everything to ensure that Europe as a whole remains united.
He added that Poland isn't sending any troops to Greenland at this time. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
And the scale of the planned European military deployments to Greenland has not been made public, but initial troop numbers appear small.
French authorities said about 15 soldiers were already in Greenland for a military exercise. Germany said it would deploy a reconnaissance team of 13. Sweden planned to send 3, Norway 2.
And the president has unveiled his long-awaited plan to lower health care costs. Republicans are planning to take quick action to move the ball forward after enhanced Obamacare subsidies expired earlier this month. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
President Trump is urging Congress to take swift action to codify his so-called Great Health Care Plan.
The lowest price in the world is what you're going to pay. Before, you were paying the highest price in the world by far, and the politicians did nothing about it. So I'm asking Congress to complete the work that we've started. Next, my plan.
His newly released plan to lower healthcare costs builds on actions his administration has already taken, like negotiations with 15 pharmaceutical manufacturers to reduce drug prices for Medicaid patients. To address Obamacare costs, the administration wants to send the money currently spent on subsidies directly to Americans instead of insurance companies.
I call it the Unaffordable Care Act, with billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies that help their stock prices skyrocket over 1,700%. I want to end this flagrant scam and put extra money straight into the healthcare savings account in your name, and you go out and buy your own health care.
Lawmakers have been working on a deal to temporarily extend Obamacare subsidies while addressing waste. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's recently been at odds with Trump, said she will not give up the effort to extend the enhanced subsidies, telling reporters, "I think we have to respond to the immediacy of the situation that we have now." Another key Republican involved in the negotiations was quick to support Trump's plan. Chairman of the Senate committee dealing with health care, Senator Bill Cassidy, said he agrees with the president and vows to take action on the president's affordability agenda.
And they will impact everyone, not just a small fraction of those who are within the healthcare marketplace, but every single American will continue to see their costs go down.
To allow for more transparency, the plan will require insurers to post details of claims and require doctors who accept Medicare and Medicaid to post pricing and fees in their offices. Trump's new plan comes as lawmakers are gearing up for a second party line big bill to pass without any Democrat votes. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And the president is calling on lawmakers to support his plan to lower health care costs called the Great Health Care Plan. Dr. Josh McConkey joins us now with more. Good to have you with us this morning, Doctor. As a physician yourself, what do you make of the plan?
I have been reading up on this extensively since it was announced yesterday and looking at everything that they've addressed from healthcare, the premium cost to the cost of medications, and then holding these insurance companies accountable. This has the potential to be one of the largest, most impactful pieces of legislation should this pass in a decade or more.
Okay, so as you mentioned, it covers price transparency, cost sharing, drug pricing. What's new in this plan, or what stands out to you?
So they want to codify the favored nation status that they've given prescriptions to other nations for several years. There was an executive order in May of 2025 that the president had signed. He would like that to be passed on to the American people. And should this legislation pass, that would be codified and become law. And personally, myself, I've lived overseas. When I was in Australia and New Zealand, I have a esophageal reflux, and the medication that I take cost me $20. Got on a plane, flew back home to the United States. The exact same medication, the same manufacturer, cost $300. So the American people have been paying extremely high costs for those medications. This will be the most impactful piece of legislation for families.
Yeah, there's so many ways to tackle a problem, but one thing families may be facing, especially at this point in time, is changes to their healthcare premiums. Are people likely to see changes to those as a result of this plan?
The Congressional Budget Office has already estimated a $36 billion decrease, almost 10%, in the cost of those Obamacare subsidies for the insurance premiums, and taking that money from Obamacare and then giving it right back to the American people to put in a health savings account. That's going to be tax deferred. So that money coming directly to you, tax deferred, is going to be tremendously powerful in families getting to choose the healthcare coverage for them. And for several reasons, Obamacare, it's unsustainable. When you look at the overall numbers, 17% of our entire GDP, almost $5 trillion, is spent on healthcare. And the Obamacare subsidies alone were 7% of GDP, $1.8 trillion. So it's not sustainable. It was expected to grow as much as 14% over the next several years. So clearly not sustainable. We need something, and this is what they were talking about, getting this new legislation passed. This is going to be a huge impact.
Wow. And I do want to talk definitely about Congress's process to get us there, because it's just a start. It's a plan right now. But just on in terms of the healthcare premiums or just the cost of healthcare, of course, that varies individual to individual according to their plan and also to their needs. But on the whole, how much do you think this might change people's the cost of healthcare for them?
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. So the overall plan, the foundation is great, and it's going to be very impactful. It's going to have a big impact on relieving that financial stress that a lot of families have right now when you talk about that affordability and that affordability crisis. But there's a lot of work to do. That big piece of legislation in the House, in the Senate, the devil will definitely be in the details. And so I'm waiting like everyone else on bated breath to read that legislation.
Yeah, when do you expect to see changes? It was a huge sticking point just even in the very last moments of last year. So this is reading the tea leaves a little, but what do you think? When will we see some change?
Yeah, there's been support in the Senate. Senator Cassidy is a physician as well, and he's come out with support for that. In the House, the Speaker Johnson has not announced when they're going to address that legislation. He's announced that he certainly is supportive of that, but This was just released yesterday, so I'm sure we'll find out, if not today, but early next week. I'm sure they'll be able to address that to the public on when they're going to attack this legislation.
For sure. And what kind of key issues do you think lawmakers will be tackling as they try to work on some kind of bipartisan agreement here?
They're going to be fighting those insurance companies. So when you look at the transparency laws that they have talked about with claims and having to advertise or at least put out there that transparency, the number of claims that they're denied and how much profits they're making off of premiums, those are things that these insurance companies have held very close to the vest for decades now. And forcing them to put that out there puts a lot of pressure on them. They're not going to like that. So there's going to be a tremendous fight with those lobbyists and those companies on this legislation for sure.
Yeah, to that point, many people have hailed the plan as really changing the fundamental dynamic between the U.S. government, the healthcare system, and the American people. Finally, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is a complete game changer in many respects. And so when you look at legislation that has, when you talk about your families and you're sitting at the dinner table and you're talking about finances and how do we get through this, how do we pay this, this piece of legislation has the potential, if it passes, to be the single biggest impact on American families in recent memory.
Wow. Well, there's so much happening, not just this, but also later this month, the administration plans to launch Trump RX, which is the direct-to-consumer website, with discounted rates. Broadly, just lastly, what do you think the impact of that could be and how soon might people see it?
Well, I did read an article, and they had done an interview with Secretary Oz, who's a physician as well with Health and Human Services, and laying out the groundwork for that. There's going to be some medications that will be much lower pricing. And then they've even talked about having some medications that are traditionally prescription only be made over the counter at some of these preferred pharmacies as well. And so you talk about saving doctor visits and having to run to urgent care for sniffles and colds. As an emergency physician, that takes up a large part of what I do every day at work. And if you can actually let people go and pick up some of those medications or go to some of these pharmacies, not only knowing that it's going to be the guaranteed lowest price, but it's going to save you some time at a doctor visit, it's tremendous. I'm really excited to see how this plays out. And, we have a long way to go and a lot of work, but this is big.
With that, thank you so much for your time this morning, Dr. Josh McConkey. Good to speak with you.
Hey, thank you.
26 people have been indicted on federal criminal charges in an alleged game-fixing scheme in men's college basketball. Authorities say it started with rigged games in China, then expanded to NCAA games in the U.S. Here are the details.
We allege an extensive international criminal conspiracy.
Federal prosecutors on Thursday announcing criminal charges against more than 24 people in an alleged game rigging scheme involving college basketball.
A transnational criminal scheme to fix NCAA Division I men's basketball games, as well as Professional Chinese Basketball Association games.
The Justice Department detailing what they described as a massive operation.
An extensive international criminal conspiracy of NCAA players, alumni, and professional bettors who fixed games across the country.
According to court documents, it all started in 2022 with game fixing in the Chinese Basketball Association. The fixers would bet on the games from the U.S. Prosecutors say they expanded the scheme to Division I college basketball games in the 2023-2024 season, allegedly recruiting players nationwide to manipulate games, paying them $10,000 to $30,000 per game to underperform. The fixers placed millions of dollars in wagers against those teams, and prosecutors say the players who allegedly took part in the scheme were paid hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Imperils the integrity of sport itself. And when that happens, the Department of Justice will step in to protect what is a sacred institution of American life.
Coming up, federal investigators say they're tracking the funding behind violent anti-ICE protests.
The FBI is calling it an organized effort to create chaos in communities.
Meanwhile, federal officials in Dallas have indicted an illegal immigrant accused of ramming immigration agents' vehicles during a traffic stop. The suspect remains at large. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. The FBI is now closer taking a look at anti-ICE protests.
That's right. As the protests grow increasingly violent, the Bureau is looking into the funding behind these demonstrations. Here's more on that.
The FBI says it's investigating the funding behind violent protests like those in Minneapolis.
And when you find things like every single person is holding the exact same sign on the exact same piece of wood and the exact same placard, they didn't get together beforehand and do that. It is an organized, in my opinion, effort to criminally disrupt and cause chaos into our communities.
Speaking on Fox News yesterday, White House Border Czar Tom Homan said various government departments are going to follow the money and find out who has been inciting violence.
We're looking at the financials. We're looking at who's funding this, who's antagonizing this, and they'll be held accountable, Laura. We're all over it.
The FBI announced a reward up to $100,000 for information leading to the recovery of stolen government property in Minneapolis or the arrest of those involved. The FBI says while they were responding to an assault on an officer this week, several government vehicles were broken into and government property was stolen. It's asking the public to send in photos or videos of the incident online at tips.fbi.gov. In a post on X yesterday, Director Kash Patel said the FBI had already arrested one person who allegedly stole government property. According to Patel, the suspect is a member of the Latin Kings gang with a known violent criminal history. The Department of Homeland Security says it arrested a man Wednesday night for assaulting federal officers. The department says the man, a U.S. citizen, showed up to a protest with a gun and a box of ammunition in a bag. According to DHS, he then threatened violence against law enforcement officers while pointing at his bag. He then pushed an officer and was arrested for assault. Meanwhile, Border Czar Homan told Fox News Thursday he's pushing for the creation of a database of people who impede ICE operations.
We're going to make them famous. We're going to put their face on TV. We're going to let their employers in their neighborhoods, in their schools, know who these people are.
President Trump has suggested he could invoke the Insurrection Act in Minnesota to quell violent protests. The law authorizes the president to deploy military forces on U.S. soil. On Thursday, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said he has the constitutional authority to do so, but expressed hope it wouldn't come to that.
We did discuss the Insurrection Act. He certainly has the constitutional authority to utilize that. My hope is that this leadership team in Minnesota will start to work with us to get criminals off the streets.
She said the administration has no plans to pull ICE out of Minnesota.
The American Civil Liberties Union is suing the Department of Homeland Security for Minnesotans who say ICE agents are violating their constitutional rights.
The ACLU filed a class action lawsuit yesterday. It's seeking to end what it calls the practice of stopping Somali and Latino individuals to investigate immigration status without any reasonable suspicion.
It argues this is a violation of their Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable government searches and seizures. The lawsuit alleges agents are targeting people based on racial profiling motivated by prejudice.
The DHS has denied these allegations, saying they are disgusting, reckless, and categorically false. A department spokesperson told the Epoch Times what makes someone a target for immigration enforcement is if they are illegally in the U.S., not their skin color, race, or ethnicity. And President Trump vowing to deploy troops to Minnesota as unrest persists over immigration enforcement. What do everyday Americans think of the proposal? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the streets of D.C. to hear from the people.
President Trump is vowing to send federal troops to Minneapolis, to Minnesota. What do you make of that? Do you think the situation over there calls for this kind of action?
Well, I think with the civil unrest, perhaps it does. We've had 4 years of the other side and the unrest, and it seems to me that it's historical that the destruction exacerbated.
They're doing their job. You can't back down. And if he needs to support the ICE, then he should probably go ahead and bring more officials in to do it.
None of us want to see on the news people getting killed or people being tear gassed just because they're protesting about the ICE agents raiding their homes. This year's supposed to be a happy year, I want everybody to be happy that things are going the way they want to.
Well, if the governor and the mayor can't do it, then my understanding is that the president does have the power to bring in National Guard if they can't follow the law.
What do you think is driving the unrest that is happening right now in Minnesota?
Oh, it's the right versus left. Extreme right versus extreme left. They did the same thing back during the Trump first term when Portland was almost burned down. Defund the police and all that. It's the same thing.
I can understand perfectly why there's so much unrest there. ICE agents coming to your house. But what I don't understand is why you guys are pushing to the point where Trump is going to send National Guard members there?
I think it's intentional by underlying financial, by paying people to protest. There's nothing to be accomplished by that. There's a lot of fraud that's being revealed about that. And those who commit the fraud and the money that's going to Syria, to the countries that shouldn't be, that's a violation of law.
Obviously, the fraud, the facts of what's happened is certainly causing it, and people get exposed. And it seems to me that those that show compassion for the side that's extorting money, here again become the victims, and the American taxpayer appears to be the perpetrator, and it's just backward.
And thanks to Sam for that report. And as we just heard, President Trump has threatened to use the Insurrection Act in Minnesota following an attack on an immigration and customs enforcement agent in the state. Joining us to discuss is Zach Smith. He's a former federal prosecutor and now a legal fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Zach, thanks for joining. To start, can you remind us what is the Posse Comitatus Act and what is the Insurrection Act and their correlation as Trump is threatening to use the Insurrection Act?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks for having me on the show this morning. The Posse Comitatus Act is the act that generally prohibits military troops for being used for domestic law enforcement purposes. Now, there are carve-outs to the Posse Comitatus Act. Certainly, if there's an insurrection or an invasion, then in those instances, the president is authorized to use U.S. military troops, either federalized National Guard troops or regular active duty troops, to help quell the rebellion or the insurrection or the invasion if it comes to those things. Now, I suspect the reason we are hearing the president threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act is because of the very horrifying scenes we're seeing play out on the ground in Minnesota. Not only do we have federal law enforcement agents being attacked while they're trying to perform their duties, but you essentially have local officials, the Minneapolis mayor, going on TV, essentially encouraging citizens to fight ICE, to help prohibit them from being able to do their jobs. This is very troubling stuff, and I think everyone should be able to agree that no one should interfere or impede or harm federal law enforcement officers while they are trying to enforce federal law.
Yeah, thanks for that breakdown, Zach. And I did see Mayor Fry. It seemed like his tune was changing slightly as things did turn violent, saying he encourages them to use peaceful means to get their voices heard, but said that any use of violence is actually, potentially advancing toward the use of what could be the Insurrection Act. And to that end, I want to get a legal understanding of if there is a very specific bar or threshold that then allows Trump to use the Insurrection Act, or is it one of these situations where he acts first and then it gets fought out in the courts?
Well, look, I think it should go without saying invoking the Insurrection Act is a very serious thing to do. I don't think anyone, including President Trump, is threatening to do that lightly. But yes, there are specified things that have to happen before the Insurrection Act can be invoked. But essentially, the president has to make a determination that federal law cannot be enforced with regular federal law enforcement agents. Now, keep in mind, we saw earlier the president invoking a different statute to deploy troops, to deploy National Guard members in places like California, Illinois, to assist federal law enforcement agents in executing their duties to help protect federal property. And the Supreme Court, unfortunately, I think in December, said that for now, they weren't going to pause lower federal court rulings that had prohibited the president from invoking that type of authority. Now, what those prior rulings did, they did not opine on whether the president could deploy federalized National Guard troops, regular active duty troops under the Insurrection Act if he felt it was necessary. And I think one of the questions courts will have to confront is who gets to make the final determination whether it is necessary for a president to deploy troops. Is that determination going to be made by the president with the information, who knows the facts on the ground the best, or is it going to be made by courts at the end of the day?
Yeah, Zach, to that point, being that it doesn't seem like there's a very specific bar or threshold, can you share with us any times in history where the Insurrection Act had been used and how it was viewed, in the rearview mirror after it was used? Was it ruled that it was appropriate use, or was it ruled that, it could not be used in that precedent?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been invoked a number of times throughout our nation's history, 37 times approximately. The last time it was invoked was in the early 90s after the LA riots, after the Rodney King beating. Now, the difference in that case that I suspect Minnesota, Illinois, other officials might point to is that the California governor requested that essentially the Insurrection Act be invoked and that federal troops be deployed to the streets in Los Angeles. Obviously, here, I doubt you will see Minnesota Governor Tim Walz requesting federal troops to be deployed. So that would be one factual distinction. But look, there is a long pedigree of the Insurrection Act being invoked in our nation's history when appropriate and when necessary to help enforce federal law, to help protect the safety and security of the communities where those troops have been deployed.
And Zach, we seem to be in a similar pattern here. We saw it after the death of George Floyd in places like Seattle and Portland. There's a powder keg situation, essentially. What do you expect is going to happen next?
Well, I certainly hope, as you mentioned earlier, that local officials will back off some of their more extreme rhetoric. I hope that local law enforcement will respond appropriately and help protect their fellow federal law enforcement agents as those federal agents are trying to execute federal law. But fundamentally, the reason I think you're seeing President Trump threatening to invoke the Insurrection Act is because you are seeing such heated rhetoric coming out of these localities. And more than the rhetoric, you're seeing a failure on the part of local officials, a failure on the part of local law enforcement to be allowed to do their duties and help protect these federal agents while they are enforcing federal law. And I think, again, it should go without saying, it should be uncontroversial that federal law enforcement agents should not be attacked, should not be harmed, should not be threatened while they are simply trying to do their jobs and enforce federal law.
And it seems like these things do escalate when people have, time off of work and school. It's Friday. We're heading into the weekend. We're hoping there's more calm. Zach Smith, thank you so much for breaking all this down for us, explaining what the Insurrection Act is and if it's going to be used.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Much to watch here, as you said, as
Indeed.
the weekend unfolds. All right, next, officials have indicted an illegal immigrant for allegedly ramming into immigration agents' vehicles last month.
The suspect, who's from Honduras, he remains on the run and he faces up to 20 years in prison on each of the 3 charges related to assaulting federal immigration agents.
That vehicles in the hands of individuals who intend to obstruct or evade law enforcement are deadly weapons. When someone runs down an ICE officer or any federal law or local law enforcement officer, those deadly weapons act as battering rams. And it is a violent attack, and it will not be tolerated.
The indictment says that federal immigration agents were conducting a traffic stop last month when the man put his truck in reverse, rammed the federal agent's vehicle behind him, and then rammed a minivan containing 2 agents. Officials say the man took off running, and 3 of the 5 occupants in the vehicle were detained.
Meanwhile, Homeland Security says ICE agents have arrested an illegal immigrant from Cuba who allegedly weaponized his vehicle in San Antonio this week. DHS Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs Tricia McLaughlin said yesterday 1 officer was injured in that vehicle attack.
Next, Tyler Robinson, the man accused of fatally shooting Charlie Kirk, is scheduled to appear in a Utah courtroom today. Lawmakers for the 22-year-old are expected to argue there's a conflict of interest, and lawyers are expected to argue there's a conflict of interest in the Utah County Attorney's Office.
They say a child of one of the attorneys was at the Utah Valley University event where Kirk was ultimately killed. Documents say the 18-year-old, who is a student at that school, was less than 90 feet away from Kirk when he was shot. However, the county attorney's office says the person in question didn't actually see Kirk when he was shot and also did not see anyone that day with a gun.
We'll be keeping you updated there. The president has unveiled his long-awaited plan to lower health care costs. Republicans are planning to take quick action to move the ball forward after enhanced Obamacare subsidies expired earlier this month. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
President Trump is urging Congress to take swift action to codify his so-called Great Health Care Plan.
The lowest price in the world is what you're going to pay. Before, you were paying the highest price in the world by far, and the politicians did nothing about it. So I'm asking Congress to complete the work that we've started.
His newly released plan to lower healthcare costs builds on actions his administration has already taken, like negotiations with 15 pharmaceutical manufacturers to reduce drug prices for Medicaid patients. To address Obamacare costs, the administration wants to send the money currently spent on subsidies directly to Americans instead of insurance companies.
I call it the Unaffordable Care Act, with billions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies that help their stock prices skyrocket over 1,700%. I want to end this flagrant scam and put extra money straight into the healthcare savings account in your name, and you go out and buy your own healthcare. And you'll make it.
Lawmakers have been working on a deal to temporarily extend Obamacare subsidies while addressing waste. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's recently been at odds with Trump, said she will not give up the effort to extend the enhanced subsidies, telling reporters, "I think we have to respond to the immediacy of the situation that we have now." Another key Republican involved in the negotiations was quick to support Trump's plan. Chairman of the Senate committee dealing with health care, Senator Bill Cassidy, said he agrees with the president and vows to take action on the president's affordability agenda.
And they will impact everyone, not just a small fraction of those who are within the healthcare marketplace, but every single American will continue to see their costs go down.
To allow for more transparency, the plan will require insurers to post details of claims and require doctors who accept Medicare and Medicaid to post pricing and fees in their offices. Trump's new plan comes as lawmakers are gearing up for a second party line big bill to pass without any Democrat votes. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And still to come, Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, speaks at the Israeli-American Council.
Witkoff discussed Iran, President Trump as commander-in-chief, and a behind-the-scenes look at bringing hostages home from Gaza.
And the U.S. government has filed warrants for dozens of sanctioned oil tankers, signaling it will continue to enforce its quarantine of Venezuelan oil exports. Those stories after this.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. I'm Carrie Dunst. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. President Trump announced the creation of a Gaza Board of Peace following phase 2 of a U.S.-backed ceasefire between Israel and the Hamas terror group. Trump says the board will oversee Gaza's governance, and he also met Venezuelan opposition leader María Corina Machado. Machado presented Trump with her Nobel Peace Prize medal. Meanwhile, officials delivered sharp warnings to Iran at an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Now, the FBI says it's investigating who is funding violent anti-ICE protests. They're vowing to follow the money and then hold those organizers accountable. Authorities have also announced a reward of up to $100,000 for information that leads to the recovery of stolen government property during a protest in Minneapolis. And 26 people have been indicted on federal criminal charges for an alleged game-fixing scheme in men's college basketball. Authorities say it started in 2022 with rigged games in China before it expanded to NCAA games in the U.S. The fixers allegedly paid players $10,000 to $30,000 per game to underperform after placing millions of dollars in wagers against those games. Those are this morning's top headlines. With that, Steph, over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. And the Israeli-American Council's 10th National Summit began yesterday in Hollywood, Florida. Middle East Special Envoy Steve Witkoff spoke at the event. He reflected on freeing Israeli hostages and discussed the situation in Iran. He also shared his thoughts on President Trump as commander-in-chief. NTD reporter Chris Bob was there.
When we got the 20 hostages home, the last 20, and their families came to the White House, the president pulled me aside. I saw the tears. He doesn't like anyone to see tears. And he said to me, "This is the greatest day I've ever had in the White House."
Last night was the first night of the Israeli-American Council's National Summit in Hollywood, Florida. Thousands of Israelis and Americans heard from speakers including U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and General Michael Kurilla, former commander of the United States Central Command. Both spoke about potential U.S. involvement in Iran. Here's what they told the crowd.
the biggest question we have to ask ourselves, and then what? What is our strategy? What is the end state we're trying to achieve? I've always been a proponent of the whole of government to take action. I'm the military arm of our instruments of national power, but you have a diplomatic, an informational, a military, and an economic. And if there is going to be action against Iran, it needs to be the whole of government. And candidly, it needs to be an international effort that is able to do that. I remember when President Trump and I were talking, Steve Witkoff was in the room, and we were talking about Iran. And I said, the one comment I said, if we're ever going to take action, I want to phone a friend, and that friend is Israel. Because of the capability and the friendship that we have with them, and Israel has very unique capabilities. So I think right now it's a very tense situation, but I think we have to always ask ourselves, what is the strategy, and then what?
The people of Iran clearly want that regime gone. What would you say to them?
I'd say to them, they're incredibly courageous people, and we stand with you. I had the great privilege of being in the command center with the president during the 12-day war. The president, he's a really good commander-in-chief. I actually asked him afterwards, like, where did you learn this? Did you go to war college? Because he's just that good.
Were you just trying to say to me, just trust President Trump, essentially?
That's what I'm saying. He's the right guy to trust.
Steve Witkoff was asked by the reporter interviewing him how President Trump is handling the situation in Iran and whether or not he will decide to involve military action. Here's what his response was to the crowd.
I hope there's a diplomatic resolution. I really do. There are 4 issues: nuclear enrichment, missiles. They have to cut back on their inventory. The actual material that they have, which is roughly 2,000 kilograms, which is enriched anywhere between 3.67% and 60%. And the proxies, of course, and I think if Iran, which is stumbling in their economy, it's a pretty serious situation. There's no water there 16 hours a day. There's no electric 12 hours a day. Inflation is probably well north of 50%. That's a lot of problems. So I think if they want to come back to the League of Nations, if we can solve those 4 problems diplomatically, then that would be a great resolution. And I think the alternative is a bad one.
Chris Bobb, NTD News, Hollywood, Florida.
The U.S. government has seized a 6th oil tanker linked to Venezuela as part of its quarantine on sanctioned oil. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on that story.
The U.S. government, through Operation Southern Spear, has seized its 6th sanctioned oil tanker linked to Venezuela. The Veronica was boarded by U.S. Marines that launched from the USS Gerald S. Ford. The seizure comes as the U.S. government has filed warrants for dozens of tankers that are part of the shadow fleet that helped the Venezuelan regime export oil.
These actions send a clear signal to Russia, China, and Iran, and to the authoritarian regimes in South America who give them a foothold in our hemisphere. The United States is ready, willing, and capable of protecting our interests, especially those closest to home.
A bipartisan group of senators met with María Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, during her visit to Washington, D.C.
Well, I think she's clearly going to become the president. I think the transition. I think that clearly Trump and Marco Rubio have a transition plan. And we know we'd all like it to happen in a day, but we are making progress. If you look at it, the political prisoners are being released, maybe not fast enough. Get them all released. So I think we're heading in the right direction. There will be free and fair elections.
Senate Democratic leadership has signaled that they will continue to attempt to limit President Trump's power to take military action in Venezuela.
And Republicans in the Senate abdicated their responsibility and said, if you want to go to war in South America, go ahead. How does that look?
The other thing we're going to do is this. We're going to be filing a whole lot more war powers resolutions. They can run, but they can't hide. We're going to have votes on all of these, and they're going to have to whip these votes very hard. I know how hard they'll have to whip.
Venezuelan opposition leader María Corina Machado pressed U.S. senators and President Trump to demand the release of political prisoners still being held by the Venezuelan regime. Thus far, the Venezuelan regime has only released about 56 of the nearly 1,000 political prisoners it keeps behind bars. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Luis, thank you. And the United States and Taiwan have reached a sweeping $500 billion semiconductor agreement aimed at bringing advanced chip manufacturing back to American soil.
Commerce Department says the deal includes $250 billion in direct investment from Taiwanese tech firms in semiconductors, energy, as well as AI.
Now, it also includes $250 billion in credit guarantees from Taiwan to expand the U.S. chip supply chain. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says chipmaker Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company may double its U.S. footprint, helping build what he called giant semiconductor industrial parks here.
The agreement also lowers select tariffs, and it includes exemptions tied to U.S.-based production, part of a broader effort to strengthen economic and national security.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will cut its 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. In exchange, Ottawa will get sharply lower Chinese tariffs on Canadian farm exports. Under the deal, Chinese EV imports will be capped at 49,000 vehicles a year, rising to 70,000 within 5 years.
China plans to lower its canola oil tariff from 84% to about 15%. Carney announced the agreements after meetings in Beijing where he and the communist leader Xi Jinping pledged to improve their relations after years of tension.
We'll be keeping you updated on that. And coming up, President Trump celebrates the Stanley Cup champions at the White House, praising the Florida Panthers' back-to-back titles.
And auto enthusiasts get a taste of some of the new vehicles on the market at this year's Detroit Auto Show. We're going to take a look at some of the latest cars in the lineup. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Mortgage rates have fallen to their lowest level in more than 3 years.
According to Freddie Mac, a government-sponsored enterprise that buys mortgages from lenders, the average 30-year fixed was 6.06% for the week ending January 15th.
The last time home borrowing rates were this low was September 2022.
Earlier this month, President Trump called for the purchase of $200 billion in mortgage bonds in an attempt to try to push borrowing costs lower.
In addition, there are signs the so-called lock-in effect has started to ease. For years, homeowners have been reluctant to sell and give up their ultra-low mortgage rates secured early in the pandemic.
But according to Realtor.com, the share of homeowners with mortgage rates above 6% has now surpassed the share with rates that are sitting below 3%. Economists generally expect mortgage rates to ease further this year.
And President Trump celebrated the Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers, at the White House yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. He declared the Panthers to be the greatest hockey teams ever after winning the second title for the second year in a row.
The team presented Trump with a custom jersey that read Trump 47. They also presented him with a gold-colored hockey stick and a ring.
The Florida Panthers beat the Edmonton Oilers 5-1 in Game 6 for a 4-2 win overall last June. Trump also congratulated the team on denying Canada the Stanley Cup for, quote, the 32nd straight year. The funny thing about this is, of course, there's not a lot of lakes that get frozen in Florida. So 50% of that team is actually made up of Canadians. But he's right. They did deny the country of Canada from bringing Lord Stanley back over the border. But the greatest hockey team of all time, by a large margin, is the Montreal Canadiens. They've got 24 cups to Florida's 2 cups. So they got a lot of work to do if they want to be in that range. Only the Yankees in the Big Four professional sports with 27 championships exceeds that of the Canadiens. So, but still, you know, it's good to have a goal. You visualize we're the greatest ever, and, you know, maybe it happens.
Well, there you go. We got to get Dave in here to discuss with you.
You don't have anything to add to that. All right.
But let's take a look at what NASA's been up to lately. It's actually a step closer to its next crewed mission around the moon.
That's right. It's preparing to roll out its rocket and spacecraft tomorrow ahead of a planned February mission.
The move marks the final phase of ground testing for the Artemis program, which aims to return humans to the moon and lay the groundwork for future missions to Mars.
The rollout allows engineers to begin the final integration, testing, and full launch rehearsals. That includes fueling simulations and countdown procedures before the rocket is cleared for its final flight.
Key to the mission is the Space Launch System. It's built to carry humans deeper into space than NASA has gone since the Apollo era.
Now, mounted on the top of the rocket is the Orion spacecraft, and it's been built with a reinforced heat shield, and that helps it survive the extreme temperatures of its re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and systems to protect the crews from radiation and deep space conditions.
Of course, it's not only exciting to see how far humankind can go, but it's also, many experts say, really essential for security for the U.S., but for the free world, really. To be able to fend off ballistic missiles and intercept them and detect them from space, to have that space dominance. So this project is both very exciting. The first time humans will be heading back so far into space, but also an essential move for national security.
Well, just like you've got nothing on the Stanley Cup, I've got nothing on the space mission, so I'm going to just defer to your expertise here.
Okay, let's get back onto the ground with the annual auto show in Detroit, Michigan. It's returning with new vehicles and new experiences.
And NTD got a close-up look on the first day of the event. NTD's Dave Lamb has the story.
Auto enthusiasts are getting behind the wheel at this year's Detroit Auto Show. The event brings together major automotive players, indoor tracks, interactive experiences, and high-end vehicles. It began on Wednesday and runs for 11 days at the Huntington Place in Detroit. Kurt McAllister of Toyota shows us the electrification of the popular RAV4 SUV.
This vehicle now is purely hybrid. So we no longer have a gas variant, we just have hybrids and plug-in hybrids. So the hybrids are entering the dealerships now, the plug-ins will enter in the spring.
Toyota says almost half of the new cars it sells now are hybrid vehicles, as much of the U.S. car industry moves toward electrification. And Jeep revealed the first and only all-electric trail-rated vehicle on the market.
I think that there are specific buyers that still want an all-electric vehicle, and I think that this is a great option for them, especially if they're already a Jeep vehicle. As this is a Jeep vehicle, you'll notice here we do have that iconic 7-slot grille, but it is illuminated, and I think that's one of my favorite parts of this vehicle when we're looking at the exterior.
Well, the hybrid is the best of both worlds that we put on this Cherokee, because you can always fill up. You have the full 500 miles of range, but still the fuel efficiency beyond that of just a gas vehicle.
Ford says it's been off to a great start in 2026 and showcased its Bronco model. It's also donating 5 specialized vehicles to search and rescue organizations. Bill Ford says the company is thinking about customers.
Can you engineer vehicles that are fundamentally lower cost so that you can pass that on to the customer? And that's what we're doing.
On Friday, American singer Robin Thicke is headlining the event's charity preview. The gala is expected to benefit 6 children's charities in Southeast Michigan. The Detroit Auto Show ends on January 25th. David Lamb, NTD News.
What's really cool about that show is they let people drive the cars at the show. You saw them testing one of those at a track, and you can go up over those obstacles. But one of the really cool things that they have there is this new frontier of aerial cars. And it kind of breaks into 2 categories. You got the ones that are basically like plane cars, and they can even go and be amphibious and go in the water. But then you got this other style, which are kind of like helicopters. So they're not planes. They're more up and down. They can kind of get you out of a jam if there's traffic or what have you. But they're not meant for long flights. So.
And I'm sure, I guess, laws haven't yet evolved too, and the other infrastructure.
I think you should get in on that and start authoring up some law, get ahead of the curve with that, right?
Who could drive these yet without that? I guess you just go into a field somewhere.
Yeah, I guess,
And
or
mess
you
around with it.
ask for forgiveness, not permission. You know.
Oh gosh. Well, we may well be reporting hopefully something good about that up ahead. But that's all we have time for right now.
But if you have a story maybe you'd like us to see cover, shoot us an email at goodmorning@ntd.com. We'd love your feedback.
And for round-the-clock original news coverage, watch us live at ntd.com/live or on our app, which I know you've all downloaded. I'm Stephanie Cox.
I'm Carrie Dunst. Have a great weekend.